This week, we have part 2 of the conversation with Sam Sey. Last week in part 1, we talked about 2019 Kanye to 2022 Ye and sort of what our perceptions are of him over that time frame. We also started the question or the conversation around the question of, is Kanye anti-Semitic? We're going to continue that conversation or that part of the conversation. Right now, we're sort of speaking about, was Kanye trolling the concept of Nazis with his comment, or that's sort of the question hypothesis I put forward, and me and Sam hash that out a little bit further. Then we're going to get into, did Kanye incite violence with his tweets? And as a little bit of free speech there, which then transitions into a conversation around Sam's political philosophy. So on that note,
And may roll the clip.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Yeah, and so I think that's the real question, right? Of like, and I use the word trolling on purpose because when he's saying, stop using the word evil beside Nazis, is he trolling the fact that we basically have allowed Nazis to be a term we allow to othering people, right? Like, now I know the woke Antifa crowd basically has made Nazis almost a meaningless term, but go back 10 years ago and that term was a very sort of like, okay, those are the evil people. And I can totally understand why, but is he trolling the identity politics with the most acceptable term? Now, again, am I steelmanning him? Am I hypothesizing? Am I saying this is 100% true? No. Part of this is coming from the fact that he's said so many comments that are hard to reconcile with each other. And so if I just say he's anti-Semitic, I still have a whole bunch of comments from him that make no sense. And so to me, it's somewhat incomplete of an explanation, is really where my brain and thoughts and all these questions are coming from.
Yeah, I think in many ways, I understand a lot of what you're doing, right? You're trying to, is there something else happening here besides anti-Semitism? I understand that.
Not to say he should have said, or we should
no.
comments
I know.
No, I think
the reason why I laughed is not because of, I'm laughing because he managed to make Alex Jones uncomfortable, and Alex Jones tried to say, well, no. He did that, right? He tried, said, no, what you really mean is, it's like, no. That's what I mean. So even when someone was trying to help him out, he's saying, no, I am saying this. Again, I can't get into his mind. I can't understand his mind, but I can understand his words. And I think to me, again, we are making him sound more confused than he really is. I don't think he's confused. I think he means what he is saying. And part of it is, one, again, God is going to judge him for those words. When he faces God, because of what I know from the scriptures, I can say that he will give an account for his partiality against Jews, not just for his thoughts, but his words. And I, as a person, can also recognize his words. I can't recognize his minds, but I can say, yeah, his words show partiality against the Jews. So I can only go from, again, what his mouth is saying, not what his mind is thinking. I don't know what his mind is thinking. But again, when he's had weeks of people reaching out to him, his friends, and even before all this came out, I remember hearing some time ago that he had an affinity for Hitler. And it was rumors. There was nothing fact-based, but there were rumors about this. And then I'm forgetting exactly what it is that he said in the Tucker interview, but they edited it out. They were trying to help him, And this is, I'm forgetting what it was, but it was very bad as well, too. So, again, I think we're giving Kanye too much credit. I think while all my thoughts are theological, I also believe in the philosophical thinking when it comes to Occam's razor. The simplest answer here is that he means what he says. And I struggle to find any other way to reason that he is not being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the other thing that he did say that I think was a comment that I still am like, gotta almost go back and re-listen to the segment. There was a part of the Alex Jones interview where he basically was like, it's the devil. The devil is what causes people, any group of people, whether the Zionist or what. And he was basically like saying, yeah, the evil is coming from the devil, deceiving people. And I'm obviously paraphrasing what he said, but that was, I think, a little bit along the lines of what you were saying, where Alex was trying to go, are you saying this? Are you saying this? And like, he was sort of, I don't want to say coached into that, but it was like, yes, no, he was like affirming sort of almost that like the people that do evil are the result of the devil causing it. And so he was, again, this is where I go back to the idea of like, is he trolling a bit? He's saying, and if I wanted to go back to your tweet, so you had a Facebook post that I don't know if you saw the comment I put back on it when you were saying about Planned Parenthood, right? Your post is Planned Parenthood do good things too. I don't like the word evil next to Planned Parenthood. I love babies, but I also love Planned Parenthood. There are a lot of things I love about Planned Parenthood. And that was in quotation marks. And then, according to some conservative Kanye fans, this would be okay. Mm-hmm. So my criticism that I sort of posted was something like, I think this is a false equivalency because Planned Parenthood is an institution or a corporation, and Nazis are generally people. And so is he like arguably trying to take evil away from categorizing people? Again, if I'm trying to steelman him, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit in these comments, but that's where I would say, okay, I don't know that he would associate it the same way, because evil, is he trying to take, I took it as he was trying to take evil away from just calling people evil, as opposed to people do evil things. And and to your point, you're probably going to go back to, well, he's calling the Jews evil.
Well, actually, that tweet was intentional. I used Planned Parenthood exactly. Guess who's called Planned Parenthood evil?
Who?
Kanye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
even more reason why you did it.
Yeah. So I was just kind of watching. I didn't read your comment yet, but he's
I posted it like honestly like half an hour before we went live. I was like, there's no way you're going to see this. So
yeah, no, but Kanye has called them evil. And he's talked about his own experience, right, with abortion and everything. So, but Nazis are a group of people made up of people, right?
Yep.
Planned Parenthood. Sorry, let me say it differently. Nazis were a group that were made up of people. Planned Parenthood is a group made up of people. It's really the same thing. It's the same thing. I think because they're an organization, we choose to but like Nazis were.
I know where you're going.
We're in a sense also an organization. So it's really the same thing. But my point is that Kanye is remarkably inconsistent. I think that the point too is that I won't say we maybe, because I'll say that Kanye's defenders are also remarkably inconsistent, because they recognize that, look, here's the intention. The intention too is that, well, Planned Parenthood does some good too. They do, right? Not concerning abortion, but not at all.
The other aspect of services.
Yeah, but there's some things I'm sure they do. I mean, they made an image of God, so they do some good. But we know we wouldn't call them good, right? Because God surely wouldn't. But yet, when it comes to the Nazis, because I think, again, because Kanye is saying that a lot of us are choosing to say, but he can't possibly mean what he's saying. No, I'm saying he really means what he is saying. Because again, if anybody right now, I don't mean to maybe call these people out, but if right from the Gospel Coalition was to say exactly what Kanye said about Planned Parenthood, man, they'll be, whoa, see, look at these guys, man. You see, they become worldly. But then when it's Kanye, because there is, I think, a certain bias towards Kanye, where he's like, well, he's a baby Christian. He's coming towards us, man. Don't you see that he's one of the few people in that horrible, horrible Hollywood who has seen the light? So we're like, man, like, let's just encourage him. Let's pray for him. Don't say anything. But TGC, like, oh man, those guys, man, they become part of the Democrats. So everything they say, we're against them. So again, I see it.
It's fair, right? Like that, and that's where I think you started off the show saying, like, you were going to go in one direction talking about anti-Semitism, and this sort of caused you to go in the opposite.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just want consistency. I want consistency, and that's I can be inconsistent, and I hate that in myself, and I hate that in others too. And I think a lot of the arguments, people I think are bending over backwards trying to make an argument for Kanye that he himself is saying, no, you're wrong. I'm saying exactly what I'm saying. So it's like so I'm like, believe the guy when he says what he is saying,
Yep.
So again, every indication, if he were to come out and say, again, I don't know how he can, what he says, what he said. If he were to come out saying, you know what, I didn't mean to say what some people think I said or something, I might be a little bit more. I mean, I don't know if I believe him, but I'd be a bit more willing to believe him. But when he's doubling down on it, and again, it's not just that interview, but it's a whole week's worth of anti-Semitic words. I struggle to come up with any other explanation but that he is saying what he's saying, he means it.
Yeah, no, and I, like I said, I think for me, it's the reconciling the multiple layers of things that he said that leaves me a little bit of like, okay, I don't know where to judge him yet. I don't want to defend him at the same time that I don't want to condemn him. I'm going to continue to sort of watch with a careful eye and hope that, this sideshow continues to some extent, because I'm enjoying the perspective from the outside. But also, as I look for, because I think the one thing that I haven't seen from him that would be very telling is the level of like, sort of action oriented that we see from the woke culture, right? Like,
say it again, please. Say it again.
The action oriented nature of what we see from the woke culture with regards to like, let's say affirmative action type of stuff regarding white privilege, right? And so we don't necessarily see, like, right now it seems like he's trying to call out certain people and categorize them as the Jews, and then label them with poor behavior, right? When he's talking about the Israeli government and making fun of Netanyahu, but in the sense of like calling for extermination of a race or calling for something negative against them. That's what I'm saying. Like there's a lack of sort of the action oriented side of unless
I think
you've heard something that I haven't heard.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I think him saying I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jews, I think would be, I don't know what that means, but what he is generally saying.
Well,
is
I took it as like
attacking
a Twitter type of, like, I think he was referencing the first time he tweeted something as DEFCON 1. And I agree with you. I didn't quite understand what he meant by that. It was like, but he was referring to like them, because on the Alex Jones show, I think he had all these canceled people, Nick Fuentes, Alex, and I think one other guy. I was listening, so I didn't see it. Tweeting from his phone as like on his Twitter account, and he made reference to that being DEFCON 2 or something. And I didn't comprehend what it is. But to your point, this could very well be a sort of action-oriented claim that would change my course of like, okay, pump the brakes.
But I do agree that he's not calling for violence, and I know we'll probably talk about that in a second, towards Jews. I agree with that. But when he says that I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jews, he is saying that he himself is going to take this particular action against Jews. So it may not be activism. Well, it may not be what we might think of as activism, but he is being an activist. He is going to these interviews, having social media posts where he is advocating against Jews. So I would say that is an action, even if it's not a policy or a protest. That's, as an individual, the best you can do now. And I think, I say the best, I should say the worst you can do now, I should say. But I think,
but that's where, again, if his personal actions are legal and, going, trying to get revenge, let's say in common business ways, I don't know, for a horrible way of saying it, right? Like we would sort of maybe have a criticism towards him, but we're not going to say it's morally unethical, right? Because, the example that comes to mind is I think about he put money in the JP Morgan account and they shut him down, right? And basically, if I understand correctly, he had like $140 million. They shut him down because he had a tax bill of $50 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and so these are examples where he's clearly been in battle. And so, again, that's where I go, that's an example where maybe the action he's referring to is I'm waging war with you individuals as opposed to a group of people that I'm, whether it's inciting
Yeah.
violence or hatred towards,
The
the broader community.
Yeah, the point I'm making those are the problem is that he's referring to these individuals as Jews, not as the
Yes.
individuals,
Yep.
not as JP Morgan, not as but as the Jews. But more than that too, um, going back to woke people, when Ibrahim Kendi largely hasn't done any real activism, he's just, at least in terms of what we might think of as Black Lives Matter type of activism. But we all call him a racist. We call him, black supremacist or whatever it is, because we know that, well, what he is saying has influence. What he is saying has an impact, and he's changing some people's minds, which we saw in 2020. So
Yeah.
I think that while Kanye, of course, is, again, I don't, in my opinion, I don't think, how do I say this? Again, Kanye is not causing any violence, but I think that would be a reductionist way of looking at it. My main thinking is he showing partiality? Is he being anti-Semitic? I'm glad he's not being violent, but there is a reality. There is a reality that, look, again, I kind of referenced it before, amongst a lot of Black people, amongst a lot of Black Americans, not the majority by any means, but a strong number of people, there is a strong hatred for Jews. And you saw that, I think, a couple of years ago, or maybe last year. There was a string of attacks against Jews from Black people.
Interesting.
Again, I'm not saying that Kanye is the problem necessarily for that. This has been going on for a long time. But Kanye's words can impact people into doing a lot of violence against Jews. Would that be him inciting violence? No. But would that be him in his own way tempting people into violence? Yes.
Yeah, providing a level of affirmation to their beliefs.
Yes. Yeah. But again, that's not saying I believe he should be canceled or anything. I'm just saying that in terms of him doing activism or whatever, I think what he is saying is bad enough that we can address that for what it is.
No, and I think that's good. And coming around to sort of the Twitter, inciting violence, I think we've sort of slowly transitioned into it. But the other part of that sort of gets into, the role of free speech. What's the response to this? Is suspending him off of Twitter. I would say, unless they're calling that Jewish star, the Star of David intermixed with the swastika, a incitement to violence. I'm not quite sure what exactly he did that would be qualified as that, because as I understand it, that's what he's suspended for.
Yeah. Sorry, I know this is live. 2 seconds. My battery is about to die, so let me just quickly charge it. Sorry, guys. This is live. It'll be truly just a few seconds.
It's all good. I will. I'll make some commentary on. So for whatever reason, Kanye posted his last tweet is like, I don't know who it is, but I would speculate it's a Jewish guy. But basically, Elon Musk is getting sprayed with a hose on a boat labeled Zeus. And the tweet was basically like, let's always remember this as my final tweet. So I don't know
sorry, bro.
It's all good.
My headphones were off. I did not hear what you were
saying.
I
know you didn't. I was sort of just giving people commentary on Twitter.
Sorry.
And his last tweet was someone spraying Elon Musk with a hose was the picture. And he's like, let this be remembered as my last tweet. I mean, he obviously knew it was getting canceled or about to get nuked, his account. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I know I didn't get any warning when I lost my Instagram. But I
miss you on there, man. You've been I was trying to.
I love it and hate it at the same time. Like, I had a little bit of a following on there. I got shadow banned a couple times, but Kanye made a comment during the Alex Jones where he's like, "Man, my 30-day detox from Instagram was like the best thing ever."
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I can definitely look back and go, like, I'm glad I'm not on Instagram. I don't know that I want to go back. I've sort of been like, until they give me my handle back, which is the TJoelN39, until I can get back with that, I'm not even going to try. And maybe it's blocked forever. I don't know.
Well, I guess you're a better man than me because I would be devastated, man, if I lost mine. Maybe I shouldn't say that in case someone on Instagram is watching. And like, you know what? When I want to devastate that guy, just get
Torture
no.
you.
Yeah, but no. I mean, part of that too is Instagram is kind of part of my work now too, so that's kind of what it is.
Yeah,
But
that would be a problem.
yeah,
Nah.
but to your question, um, yeah, I said it. I've said it a couple of times. I think once in my article and on social media that I don't believe he should be canceled. I don't think he should lose his social media because of what he's saying. Now, I've made it pretty clear that I find what he's saying disgusting, and I find a lot of people's words or reactions in support of Kanye disgusting, and yet I want the right to be disgusted by some people's words. And I want people to have the right to say some disgusting things because some people, in fact, one of the fascinating things about the past week is I've managed to anger three different kinds of people. I've angered a lot of people that I would say are anti-Semitic or people who are defending Kanye. Not that everyone who's defending Kanye is anti-Semitic. I'm just saying that there's a lot of
Yeah,
confusion.
there's
there.
an overlap there.
Yeah. And then there's also, I made a post about, I think it was about gay marriage or something like that. And a lot of the LGBTQ people came after me, like hundreds of them came after me. And then in my article, I also talked about how if you are a critical race theorist, you're no different than anti-Semitic people, which brought a lot of the woke people against me because they were also angry at me. So I angered, and I was getting a lot of, I mean, I don't care. I laugh at some of the comments that they're saying, but so I was like, yeah. Anyway, but the point is that some people find my words disgusting, and I don't think that because of that they should be canceling me from social media either. So I completely believe in free speech for all. As I mentioned in my article, unless someone is essentially committing a crime, unless they are threatening violence, unless they are truly inciting violence. What he did was not inciting violence. What he did was horrible. It's obviously offensive to a lot of people, but I don't believe that he should be canceled. If someone calls me, I mean, I'll only use the full word, but I don't know how people feel about it. So I'll just say the N word. Someone called me the N word. I say, well, they've sinned. Should they be banned for that? No. So yeah, so so that I was very disappointed in Elon Musk for doing that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, this sort of ties in well to where I want to go just to finish up is, sort of your political philosophy. This sort of touches free speech. And I would, based on what you've said, you're, let's say, 1 degree removed from an free speech absolutist. It's probably a good, some level of reservation. But for the most part, I think you would agree that the answer to bad speech is more speech, not silencing of the speech.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, you might disagree with me, but I would still call myself a free speech absolutist. I wouldn't have, free speech absolutionist. I wouldn't have an issue with that phrase. Although some people might think that I'm not, which is fine. But that's what I would say for myself, anyways.
Yeah, and I only say 1 degree removed, as in like maybe there's a small segment of things that let's put that in the corner. But for like you said, inciting violence or committing a crime. Other than that, let people say whatever they want to say. Let them hang themselves in some sense. And I think censorship is either motivated out of hiding ideas, or you're treating people like children, right? Like they're not adult enough to think for themselves and recognize bad ideas.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about my political philosophy in a second, but Elon Musk has said that he does believe that Twitter is what did he use? Forgetting the phrase he used. It is the town hall, I think, of our society. And is that what he used? Town hall? Maybe I'm forgetting exactly.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, he's also said, I think this is pretty good. He's like, I want to piss off 10% on the left and 10% on the right. If I'm 80 are happy with me, then we're good. I think it's a pretty decent way of trying to find a solution for how Twitter should run.
Yes. But the problem is, unless I'm wrong, because sometimes I guess the laws on hate speech. I mean, in Canada, In Canada, Kanye would be in jail for 25 years for posting that image. In America, I'm not quite sure that would be the case. So, you know, if my point is that if Kanye's words are not criminal, and they're not, then he should be on social media. At the same time, I also do affirm the right. Now, people might disagree with me on this, some conservatives, but that Twitter has, I think, the right to do whatever they please.
Yep.
I hate that they have that much power, but I also know that they're a private organization, and I want them to then choose for themselves what they think is best. The same way that I want every private owner of a business to choose for themselves what they think is best as well.
Yeah. And ideally, we want them to be transparent about how they operate, so we can tell them to screw you if we don't like it.
Exactly. Right.
Exactly. And so it's an aspect of walking away. So, I mean, what's great is, you know, without even trying, we also sort of touched on property rights. Again, you know, another political philosophy, right? Which, and I would say I'm right there with you, right? I'm if I use this term in reference to the healthcare, but I think it sort of relates here. I've been saying more recently that both American and Canadian healthcare are actually a lot more similar than people think. They're both very authoritarian. In Canada, we have a socialist system, and in the States, we have a fascist system. And largely that is that the system is so highly regulated and so highly influenced by government telling the businesses what to do that they're both authoritarian systems. And you don't have property rights with respect to healthcare.
By the way, I'm not surprised by what you said, but I'm still glad that you said it. I hate it when people call our as in Canada's healthcare system, a social healthcare. No, it's a socialist healthcare. I hate that so much. It's like, what is the social healthcare? It's socialist. Call it communist. Call it socialist. Don't call it social. Don't call it free. Don't call it government run. No, it's socialist. So anyway, yeah, I agree with you there. But yeah, I've actually never heard someone refer to America's healthcare system as fascist. And you're right. You're very right. I didn't think about that. I knew, of course, that it was authoritarian, but I did not quite refer to it as fascist. And yeah, that's actually very true. Right?
Well, and I think for you know, we did an episode on intro to fascism and liberalism, and I think, you know, so many people, the predicament is that they associate the other aspects of a fascist government with fascism. And really the simplest sense, it's government control of private property.
Yeah.
That's what fascism is. It's that the problem is that these fascist governments usually use a lot of violence. They use other tactics in order to sort of execute their programs or plans, not to mention, you know, the killing of their citizens and other things that go along with it. So I think fascism has a much broader sort of reference point, but in the simplest sense, that's what it is. It's I'm glad you liked it. In terms of, let's coming back to your philosophy, I think, you know, many people would probably call you a conservative, put you in the conservative camp. Where would you, you know, maybe you don't have to necessarily give yourself a label, but, you know, where does your political leaning sort of derive from, or principles? You know, I always say, like, I'm more principle based, and so, hey, what's the principle? Let me apply it to the context, figure out what makes sense. So
I don't mind labels whatsoever, but I also don't mind the term conservative. I think I am a conservative, but when I say I'm a conservative, I mean it more so in the original sense. I mean it in the social sense. I am a lot of conservatives have become big government. I'm nowhere near big government conservative. I think actually that's an oxymoron. Doesn't make any sense. Nevertheless, it's interesting because I don't think I've actually referred to myself by this label for a while because of how things have changed a lot politically for a while. But I would describe myself as essentially a libertarian, which will some might probably give me no, not Sam, not you. But I am a libertarian. I'm a libertarian, or I'm also okay with an extremely small government conservative. So libertarian or small government conservative. Now, interestingly, some people call me a theonomist, which as a libertarian is interesting. But in a weird way, I'm realizing that there is somewhat of a... So I don't call myself that. But some people say that I am, because they say that there are different kinds of theonomy because my libertarianism, I think, is still informed by scripture. So I'm a Christian libertarian. And in many ways, so for example, one of the big ones is when it came to how the government dealt with COVID. That's when my thoughts, someone said, well, Sam, you sound like a theonomist. And I said, well, what does the Bible say about what to do with those who are sick and those who are not? And long story short, when it comes to leprosy in the scriptures, right? Leprosy, well, you quarantine the sick, and then the healthy live however they please, in terms of with work and things like that. And that's what I was saying when it came to COVID. Some say, well, your reasoning for that is a theonomist view, and what they were saying was, well, simply theonomy is what does the scripture say when it comes to politics. And so again, I don't say that I'm a theonomist, but some say that I'm a very small, theonomy. Oh, I mean theonomist. So, but generally, I say libertarian, very, very small government conservative. That's where I would stand.
Well, and I mean the theonomy part is interesting because I think those that would sort of embrace that term would counter the argument saying everyone's a theonomist.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea is that your moral guidepost is the means that you argue government should operate. And that's equivalent to theonomy. You just don't use theology as the guidepost for your morality. And so I think as I heard that, I was like, okay, I get it. The problem is that many people see theonomy, I think, as the causing for like, oh, I want the social fabric part of government to be aligned with scripture. And I think this is where, me and you would probably align a lot with regards to the libertarian sort of Christian libertarian. There's a very, and this is sort of more so my political philosophy regarding, the role of government, the role of, use Romans 13 as largely a means to resolve interhuman disputes. So the role being more about, to use the sword so that man doesn't take vengeance among himself, right? That we use objective standards to resolve dispute. Where I think many conservatives, in not the small government conservative, but many conservatives would sort of want the social ideas that they value to be, within the law, rather than say, no, the law doesn't have a role here. And so, not to go down any particular, nuances or scenarios where it's tighter, but I think, the example that comes to my mind is like, let's use drugs as a good example, right? The idea that we think it's morally wrong, therefore it should be illegal, right? And I would say that's theonomy. 100%. That's a theonomist.
Right? Actually, so I think, I'm not sure if some theonomists would agree with you, but I would actually say that unless I'm completely off, and that's possible, drugs are not banned in the Old Testament law. So I can say that, well, actually, in the Old Testament, while it was obviously, it was a sin, morally wrong to be doing that. But if you were to be a drunkard or to be anything else, well, that's on you. But the law did not really address that, unless I'm wrong. Although obviously there's certain things where if you're drunk and then you kill someone, right? That's you'd be punished for that. So for me, and this was I wrote an article about this actually maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but I say, legalize all drugs, which I'm probably really gonna shock some people here. But I think the government doesn't have anything to do with that. Now, again, society, the church should really be helping out people who have drug addictions. Absolutely. I think that will actually be a lot more effective than the government being involved. They only make things worse. But yeah, drugs is where I say it should not be criminalized whatsoever. And I would, it's not something that I'm too disturbed by, but I would say that I think it'd be better if it was completely decriminalized.
No, and I mean, without going down the rabbit hole, because I could totally make some of the arguments for it. But I think the reason I said theonomy is that the idea that, let's call it the straw man version of a theonomist is essentially, they think this is morally wrong, therefore it should be illegal.
Yeah.
And my point is actually that I think a lot of conservatives and a lot of liberals operate in that manner.
Yeah.
Right. And so arguably they're more theonomists than us as Christian libertarians, because we're like, no, the government shouldn't do that. No, the government shouldn't do that. No, the government shouldn't do that. Like, and we're limiting government's role onto things of, as I said, resolution to dispute between harm between individuals. The no victim, no crime sort of is a libertarian concept, but I think that I think you would agree, we could use scripture as a basis for that. And I think with regards to drugs, for any of the Christians or conservatives who are sort of were ruffling their feathers, my one-liner is always, if someone within your family had a drug addiction problem, would you think locking them behind bars is the best means to restore them to the responsibilities that you think they should be that they're abdicating with this addiction? And I would assume everyone's going to say, oh, yeah, okay, fine. No, I want to help my brother. I want to help my sister-in-law or whoever it is, right? And the way to help them might be really difficult, and you're not really sure what the answer is, but you're like, I don't think it's forcing them to go to jail.
Yeah. That's a great point.
So, I mean, in terms of, your political philosophy, if you sort of encounter new scenarios, if someone sort of challenges you or makes you, like the drug question that we sort of had, what would be sort of the things that you usually pull on? As I said, I'm very principle based, but, is there other principles, or is it just, hey, what does scripture say? How do I reconcile this with scripture? And then, how do you bring it to the law side or the political side?
Yeah, that's a good question. It largely, it always comes down to, okay, is this, I'm trying to figure out how, I think it's usually, is this a sin? One, if it's a sin, in terms of whether it's drugs or whatever, if it's a sin, okay, then I know it's wrong. But then what does the Bible say is the role of the government? And it is to punish evil, but what evil is it addressing? And I would say it is the evil of there being evil that leads to a crime. Now, I'm speaking in terms of in Romans 13, the Apostle Paul there is speaking not of the Old Testament law necessarily, although it does apply. He's also speaking in the context of of Rome, right? So he's speaking in context of even a secular society as well. So I'm thinking, okay, what does the Bible say about this? Is it a sin? Is this an injustice? And what is the role of the government when it comes to this? So that's largely how I deal with it. And again, I think that I would agree with you. If someone has committed an injustice where they have robbed someone's unalienable rights, if that has happened,
violated their property,
their person, that then there needs to be a punishment. But if their person or their property has not been harmed, then it is not the role. It's a role perhaps for the church, but not a role for the government to address.
So the last question that I can think of that I also asked Joe Boot regarding the use of prisons, and how does that reconcile with essentially what you just said? You said punishment, and I would say that the Bible seems to be more so in line with restitution, is more so the punishment, right? You must restore the person you've caused harm to. And that's some extent your punishment. And then we obviously have some exceptions being, let's call it the ultimate depravities of murder, rape, those kind of things with capital punishment. So how do you sort of think about our current use of prisons, and how does that reconcile with a biblical take of punishment?
I've not thought too deeply about that, to be honest with you. I've thought a lot more about capital punishment, things like that, and how a lot of people are moving away from that. I support, of course, capital punishment, or I should say death penalty, especially. But I have thought a lot more about. Well, I have been thinking in terms of what would that look like in terms of restitution, but not as a replacement for prisons necessarily. Not that you're saying that. I don't mind the role of imprisonment, but there are. But see, part of the difficulty is this is where some will recognize that, okay, I'm not a really a theonomist, and although some theologians would agree with me with this, is that how I interpret the Old Testament laws when it comes to politics is that, of course, we are not Israel. We're not called um, to restore Israel in any way in our nations. But clearly, the Old Testament does apply to how we understand justice. Um, so I want to apply the Old Testament law as best as I can in my in our nations or in my nation. So I'm not going to. I wouldn't think that I am supposed to replicate every law in the same manner, but in a somewhat subjective or practical way, there are certain things where I might say, you know what, in this case here, it should be imprisonment. But this other case, it should be restitution. Whereas in the scriptures, it might always be restitution, right? It for the time of people of Israel. So that's just how I generally see it. But I've not thought too deeply about it, and I might be in the wrong when it comes to my political philosophy. I wasn't always a libertarian. I became a libertarian maybe 2016, maybe. So um, I could end up, changing that view as well too. So I'm much more practical on my political philosophy than I am on other things.
No, and I think that's good. I think that there is. I would say simply we should be engaging the conversation because use a simple example of like we spend how much money to imprison somebody. What's the societal cost to imprisoning people, and is this actually the best means of let's call it policing society for an oversimplification. And I think the way you worded it is right. Like, oh, you know what, restitution would make more sense in this context. And I think the other thing that we undervalue with restitution is the idea of grace, because many times that would lead for the opportunity for forgiveness and grace, because a little bit more understanding of here's the punishment, right? The whole, hey, you owe them a cattle for this punishment, obviously the old
Yeah.
school Jewish
Yeah.
Torah reference here, but that created the opportunity for forgiveness to say, you know what, half or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
the ability for the person who was offended to actually reconcile.
Yeah.
I would argue our current system removes that.
I agree with
Right?
you. I agree.
You're looking for closure because they got the punishment they deserved.
Yes.
Which,
yeah.
So
You're right.
yeah, it's
You're
an
right.
interesting. So now we're at the end of the show. As we always do, what's your 2 cents? I mean, I think you've already sort of said it. We'll come back to the Kanye piece. If you want to just sort of give a last minute wrap up, I think I already know what you're going to say, but yeah, what's your 2 cents?
Yeah, I think Kanye's words are anti-Semitic. I believe that's in my, I don't think there's any doubt of that. But more than that, I think as a Christian, so now what do I do about it? Because some people are influenced by my words, I want to make that position very clear. I want people to understand, as I said in the article, that I hate woke ideology. I despise it. But I don't despise it because it's coming from leftists. I hate it because it's coming from Satan. I hate it because it's sin. By the grace of God, I hate sin. So the best way I can love Kanye is to hate his sins. And the people who are defending Kanye and they're saying, but he's our brother. That's not how you support your brother, man. You support your brother by not supporting his sin. So
They call him out on his BS.
Exactly. And what scares me is so many people are defending Kanye online. How is that going to make him repent? How is that going to make him grow more in Christ? I don't think it will whatsoever. That's assuming he really is a believer, and I have my doubts of that, sadly. But yeah, so what I'm saying is I want us to really, if we hate woke ideology, if we hate it, let's be consistent, man. Let's love the gospel. Let us hold fast to what is good and let us hate evil. That's what God says. That's not what I'm saying. That's what God says. So let's hold to that.
Yeah, and I'll say I think he's definitely been reckless with his words. He's definitely been careless with his words in a manner that is not productive. I think that he's definitely been deceived by the sin that's been done against him. In terms of the groups, the people that he's associating with, the people that he puts in the category of the Jews or as Jewish people that he's sort of broadening some comments about. I think the sins that have happened against him or the harm that he's experienced is deceiving him. And the question becomes for me, I'm still a little bit hesitant to go, is there hatred here? It seems like it. I'm leaning in that direction, and I'm sort of waiting for, let's call it the confirmation. And I don't want to say that I'm defending him, but I have a little bit of reservation to go, okay, what's really going on here? Because, sorry, go ahead.
So sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to. Sorry.
No,
But
it's all good.
I just want you to understand. It's generally out of curiosity. It's not some kind of gotcha or something. It really is out of curiosity. What would that confirmation look like?
I think sort of, let's say, ramping up of hatred in a manner that seems beyond the people that have harmed him. Because when I hear so even, when he's making reference to Netanyahu, if I'm not mistaken, he would put Netanyahu in the Zionist category.
Probably, yeah. That'd be the implication from what he was saying.
Right. And so a lot of his mocking comments from Netanyahu, is that attributed to Zionist as opposed to the Jews in general, right? So a confirmation that he's calling all Jews killers and pedophiles, as opposed to, let's say, a subsect who justifies such behavior, right? And so I'm just looking for where is the trend continuing towards anti-Semitism? Because I would agree he's definitely in that direction, and obviously if I knew his heart, I could actually judge him to know where he does fall. And I think what I said earlier, just the excessive amount of things that I feel like I need to reconcile to his anti-Semitism, because it's sort of like comments that all groups of people are good, but all groups of people have the propensity towards evil, right? Is sort of going, okay, so you say that, but then you're also saying these comments that people want to classify as anti-Semitic, and I can understand why on the surface there definitely seems like you're going in that direction. I just have a level of, the other side of it is I have a level of reservation when mainstream and everyone is against him, right? When everyone's calling to cancel him, I'm just sort of like, okay, I want to wait. I want to have pause to go, I'm looking for my own confirmation. And, to reference our past podcast, we did the podcast on Hockey Canada and the culture concerns and all that craziness. And I took forever to read on it because I was afraid I was just going to be reading sort of like surface level commentary, that wasn't substantive. And so that's, I took until sort of now, this is like what, 6 months, 8 months later, let's say the good and the bad articles have been written. And so the ability to sort of weed through and find out more is sort of, in that example, I didn't even want to talk about it until Darnell was like, we got to do a podcast on this. I was like, oh, fine. I got to read all these articles now and figure out what really happened, because, the cancel culture straw manning is just so hard to get through if you're just reading the first things that come up. Right. And you're not really taking the time to do your due diligence. And that's why I said, like, I listened to the Alex Jones podcast like 3 times because I'm like trying to find the really bad comment that I can go, okay, here's when he said this, that I'm like, we can't, that, there's no misunderstanding. Right. Like, I don't know if you noticed this. If you didn't watch it, there's I'll put it in the show notes page where there's a video for him as the beforehand. It was like some guy, I guess, who was driving him around. He basically wanted to get the net for his head, and he had the yoo-hoo as a way to say Netanyahu. So, like, this mask on his face was partly about, like, maybe the mask piece was part 1, but part 2 was, like, he had the yoo-hoo drink. That it was just, like, all of this, like, creative, again, I go to the musical genius comment. I see all of that coming through in weird ways that make me go, like, does he view this as, like, an art that he's crafting this, like, conversation? And it's just sort of, again, peculiar to me, and I can't quite reconcile all the pieces at this point. And that leaves me in a manner of, like, I'm not going to defend him, but I'm also not going to condemn him.
Um, I think that Kanye could be a very skillful anti-Semitic. I so everything he said, um, I yeah, he can be creative in every way, but I think how it's still coming out is that it's anti-Semitic. But um,
And that's
yeah,
why I
but
started with that deceived by his pain, right? Like, because I definitely can tell that there's been, people that he's worked with in his career who have harmed him.
yeah,
And he classifies them as the Jews.
yeah,
And so is that much like we would say for other groups of people? Sometimes the individual harm you have causes your perspective of things to be skewed. And
yeah.
and
I think
so
yeah, that's true for a lot of feminists, the Me Too movement. That's true for a lot of woke people. But I think we don't give them the kind of
Grace.
leeway. I wouldn't use grace because
Yeah.
I don't think that's grace, right? But I think we don't excuse them the way we are excusing Kanye. I think again we're giving him too much credit.
Well,
Um,
and I think the problem is the contradictory side of it, right? Like with a Me Too or feminist movement, there isn't sort of like contradictory things coming out of his mouth or their mouth that you go like,
but they are right. So a woke person says, I love white people. I just hate whiteness." Right? They'll say that. Well, sometimes they're white. It's like, well, I love my mom, I love my parents, but whiteness is a problem.
yeah,
So I think there are too many contradictions as well too. But I think that because we don't know these people as well as we think we know Kanye, because we don't admire these people the same way we admire Kanye, we're a lot more willing to give them to say, well, it must be because of their genius,
yeah. No, and
the
I think,
foolishness when it
um,
comes.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think for me, the comment also about like where I'm saying they're not, the contradictory statement is more, his proclamation of being saved, and the actions that are very much like, um, you know, anti-establishment, but at the same time, um, being very like, I love everybody. Right. Again, I go back to like what he said about, you know, um, the microphone comment or other, again, I know you're saying it's propaganda, but again, is he being deceived by the propaganda, or is he trying to make reference to the fact that like it's almost like we can't reference the good things they did before they did the ultimate evil? And again, if he's saying that,
Yeah.
that's a different comment than how he's articulated it. But that's
Mhm.
me trying to reconcile the fact that like they doesn't all quite line up.
Yeah.
And if it did, I'd be 100% okay. Yeah, anti-Semite, no question asked. It's no
Mhm.
brainer, right?
Yeah, maybe the best comparison I could have from the other side would be Kyle James Howard. He is a professing Christian and he is super woke. And
Mm,
a lot of people will say, that guy, he seems to say some brilliant things that's unifying. But then the next minute he's saying that's something that sounds really racist. But then it's like, well, but then his wife is not black, so he cannot be. But a lot of these things, and I'm like, well, and then they said, but he professes to be Christian. He goes to a church and all that. I'm like, well, you can only go by what he is saying. And
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
he will say things that sounds good. Like I said, the devil doesn't always say everything that is, oh, not some of the devil's words sound good or are good, but the reasons why he is saying it is to cover for the things that he is saying that are bad, and that's what
yeah.
deception is. Deception.
Well,
If Kanye was, so go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's the one thing about Kanye is like he doesn't seem to try to cover for his other comment, right? Like he's like, no, that's what I'm saying, right? Like my point, So there's like I don't disagree with you in terms of the parallel because I think you've drawn a really good parallel, and I think for someone who's knows the guy, and if they were in a parallel to me of being like, I'm still reserving judgment, I'm not quite there, we would sort of understand it because you're like, you'll get there, don't worry, right? Like in terms of if with the level of knowledge that you have on this individual and the comments that they've made, right? So I think with Kanye, I sort of view it as it's still evolving and we're going to see for sure where he falls. I'd be shocked if all of a sudden it's just like goes away and he somehow tries to run for president and this kind of rhetoric is like gone, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's an interesting dilemma we find ourselves in, because go back to the idea of like he makes comments about the porn industry and pedophilia and different things and that's where I would say like we're like, okay, I see where he's coming from. I agree with a lot of those comments in terms of the like Instagram reference and those kind of things, right? So it's, again, for me, it's just deferring judgment as opposed to saying, oh, okay, let's defend him.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah, we've
I
had a good.
I was gonna say I knew we didn't totally agree, which is why I thought
No.
as you're about to say.
Yeah. No, yeah, I am I hear what you're saying, but obviously we do disagree on that. And either way, I know it's a good conversation. I know it'll be good for a lot of people to hear. And they can see how you're wrong and how I'm right. I'm just teasing.
I love it.
I'm just
No,
teasing. I'm teasing.
Yeah, of course, man. And on that note, 6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.